Hey everyone, Fearcrawler here. Welcome to the video. I do hope you'll enjoy these 15 horror stories. In the video description below, you will find links to the horror narrators' channels, as well as timestamps to tell you where each story starts. If you like what you hear, please take a moment and check out each narrator's channel. Don't forget to subscribe as well. So get comfortable, dim the lights, and enjoy the stories.
The Mount Robson Disappearances by Elize Alexis. In the summer of 2006, two groups of tourists took to the now closed hiking trail up Mount Robson in British Columbia. What resulted was one of the strangest cases of missing persons in the province's history. As the son of one of the hikers who went up that day, I've naturally wanted to find out exactly what happened. Long after the investigation closed, I continued to search for answers. This is what I discovered based on eyewitness testimony, police records, and meteorological data. The day started off a little chilly for that time of year, but not chilly enough to be considered dangerous. The tour guide separated the hikers into two groups: Group A, the fast group, and Group B, the leisurely group, which was a diplomatic way of saying they were slow. My mother, an avid hiker, was put into Group A. There was supposedly a running gag between the guides that whoever reached the summit last had to wear these embarrassing neon green socks on their next excursion, but to make things fair, they would get to lead the faster group next time. At least that's how they explained the very unfashionable socks worn by the leader of Group A that day. Both groups are estimated to reach the summit by noon, with Group A scheduled to arrive about an hour ahead of Group B. Each group had two walkie-talkies for safety reasons. The hike itself was supposed to be fairly safe, taking the scenic route on multiple occasions to avoid potential danger spots. There was only one way up, and only one way down. Group A quickly took to the trail, while Group B lagged behind. They made it about 2/3 of the way up when my mother slipped on a mossy rock and sprained her ankle. One of the guides got on the walkie-talkie and contacted Group B, who was carrying the first aid kit. At that point, Group B was little under half an hour behind. Not wanting to ruin their reputation of being the fastest, Group A insisted on going on ahead without my mom. They left her by the trail with one of the guides and their extra walkie-talkie, then resumed their hike. The temperature was getting much more comfortable by that point, so the guide and my mum didn't have to take any special measures to stay warm while they waited for Group B to catch up. For the next half hour, everyone stayed in contact using their respective walkie-talkies. Everything seemed fine. Group B eventually caught up to my mum. As they were tending to her ankle, they called ahead to Group A to check on their progress. At that point in time, they had almost reached the summit. Now, once she was patched up, my mum could have chosen to turn around and gone back down the mountain with her guide, but she chose to keep going with the slower group. I guess she really wanted to see the summit. And this is where things get weird. At approximately 10:55 AM, a sudden increase in temperature and atmospheric pressure was reported. Based on meteorological data, there was a spike of approximately 15 degrees Celsius that dissipated by the time the devices conducted their next check. This is just an educated guess, but that means it lasted somewhere between 3 and 5 minutes. Now, to be fair, Environment Canada's meteorological data services deemed this spike to be a glitch, but many people in the surrounding area did in fact report feeling a sudden, but temporary, wave of heat around at the same time. Despite this, Group B continued their trek up the mountain, with my mum in tow. When they reached the summit, they found themselves alone. They could see Group A's tracks all the way up to the summit, but they ended there. No tracks going down, no signs of going over the edge, no sign of them anywhere. The guides tried contacting Group A on the walkie-talkie, but never received a response. It was assumed that their walkie-talkie had run out of batteries, and since my mother and the guide had been left with their only spare, they hadn't been able to reply. Investigators assumed they'd gotten lost in the woods and never made it to the summit at all, that the tracks were all from Group B. Whatever the case, 15 hikers went missing that day and were never found. I often asked my mum to tell me her side of the story, to clue me in on any detail I might have missed, or things that hadn't been reported, but she refuses to talk about it. She'll either change the subject or stare off blankly into space until I shut up, which is really abnormal for my mum. There's only one other thing that's ever solicited that kind of response out of her: the feet. In 2007, feet, mostly left feet, started washing up on the shores of British Columbia. No one knows where they're from or who they belong to, but they've been periodically showing up. Severed feet, still wearing their running shoes. Go ahead, look it up if you want to. It's one of those really bizarre unsolved mysteries you rarely hear about. And when my mum hears about them, she goes quiet as the grave. You wouldn't think that those feet would be related to this story in any way. Mount Robson is on the east side of British Columbia, far inland bordering Alberta. You wouldn't think there'd be any connection. But you also wouldn't think that many people wear high-end hiking boots with bright neon green socks, like the one that washed up on the shore last week.
A few years ago, when I was in college, there was a tragedy near the university I was going to. An older woman had been found in her bathtub with her wrist slit. The kicker was that she had been there for 3 months and she died. So, she had just been sitting in a bathtub full of congealed blood for months, just rotting. Apparently the stench was so bad that the neighbors had finally decided to confront her about it, only to find out that the owner had committed suicide. The house was cleaned, her possessions were sold, and the bathtub was replaced. It was on the market for a while, but the real estate agent had to be very upfront about the tragedy, so no one wanted to buy it. The price had dropped pretty far my senior year, which was lucky for me since I had just had a falling out with my roommate, so I bought the house. Now, I believe in ghosts, and I have ever since I was a child. Fortunately, I wasn't exactly scared by the idea of being haunted by this woman. She seemed more tragic than anything, and I doubted she'd be malicious. It didn't take long for activity to start. I'd find things placed in different positions than how I'd left them, or when I left the room, electronics would turn on or off. I didn't mind it. I figured the woman was just bored after being dead for so long. I gladly shared my space, and greeted her at any time that I could. It was 3 months after I'd started living there that the dreams started. They were always the same: a woman sobbing in the corner of the bathroom, whimpering out the words, "the basement," over and over again. She was thin, almost shriveled, and the bathtub was filled with blood. The morning after I first had this dream, I went to the bathroom and found a rust-colored stain in the tub. I scrubbed it for what felt like hours, and I even tried bleaching it, but it wouldn't go away. It was probably paranormal, I figured, but I was confused by the sudden behavior of the spirit. It didn't make any sense, especially the dream. The house didn't even have a basement. Other than that, however, their normal activity continued. I began to leave small offerings for the spirit, things like tea or food, and they were always gone in the morning. I graduated later that year, and prepared to move out of the house. I had been cleaning out the hall closet when I came across a strange trap door under the boxes that I had piled on top of it. Not really thinking, I hefted it open and lowered myself down the ladder that was inside. The first thing I noticed was it stunk. It stunk really bad. The second thing I noticed was it was furnished. There was an old bed, some armchairs, and a lamp. I figured it was probably just the past residents' forgotten items. I turned around to leave and heard a crunch under my foot. And when I looked to see what I had stepped on, I realized I recognized it. It was a small porcelain plate that I owned. I quickly surveyed the area and instantly found more things of mine. There were dishes, silverware, clothing, even wrappers and half-eaten pieces of food that I had bought. I felt queasy all of a sudden. I got out of that basement as quickly as I could. That night I stayed with a friend. I had called the cops about the basement, and I was called into the station the following day. The first thing that they told me was that someone had been living there, but they didn't find them. I was upset by this, obviously, and I felt completely violated by the fact that there was someone else in my home. The second thing that they told me shattered the previous feeling and shook me to my core. They had found 20 bodies under the basement floor. They said they were all wrapped neatly in plastic, which stopped the smell of rot from spreading as quickly. All of them were women, and they all seemed to have been drained of blood. It appeared as if that they'd been dragged through a tunnel that connected the basement to the nearby woods on the border of my backyard. It was horrifying, but even more horrifying was the epiphany I had. The woman had not committed suicide. She'd been killed by an unseen roommate.
It was the 4th of July, and the fireworks had just finished in my city. I was downtown, along with what seemed to be about 100,000 other people. It was shoulder to shoulder on the riverbank, on the sidewalks, everywhere, as people tried making their way home after the display. Also, just for reference, I am a 25-year-old female. I bid my friends farewell as they went to our friend Ethan's loft that happened to be directly downtown. I had to get home as soon as possible since I had to be at work at 5 a.m. the next morning. My car was about a mile walk from where I was, a reasonable walking distance under normal circumstances, but with these crowds it would probably take me much longer to get back, considering some roads were completely blocked off to foot and car traffic. That's when I had an idea. I pulled out my phone and summoned an Uber. Looking at the map, there was one close by. It was only a few blocks away, and the arrival time was about 10 minutes from now. I stood at the edge of the curb and waited, flipping through my various social media accounts and doing my best to stand out of everyone's way. Only a few minutes passed when I saw a car pull up. The darkly tinted passenger window rolled down to reveal a man in the driver's seat. "Uber?" he asked. "Yes, that's me," I said, and got into the back seat of his car. I shut the door and told him my car was just up on 1st Street. He nodded and said he knew a shortcut there and started driving. I asked him how his night went and made other various awkward small talk. He was pretty nice, and soon I just decided to get back to my social media accounts and enjoy the ride as best as I could. Well, a little while ticked by, and I realized we still weren't there yet. I looked up, and the people on the streets were now sparse, and we were definitely getting out of the downtown area. "Are we close yet?" I asked the driver. "Oh yeah, I'm just making a loop outside so we can avoid the crowds, but we'll end up back on Church Street." "1st Street, I corrected him. "Oh, that's what I meant. It's been a long night," he told me. At this, I started to get the slight nagging feeling something was off. The streetlights started to get more and more distant, and that's when my greatest fear rang true. My phone vibrated as a text popped up. "Hey, it's the Uber driver. I'm at your location," it read. My heart sank and my mouth went dry. I quickly opened up the Uber app and checked the driver's profile that was supposed to be picking me up. 2015 Chevy Cruze was his car. Not being very car savvy, I glanced at the driver's steering wheel of the car that I was in. Nissan, it read. If I'm not in an Uber, then who is this guy? Panic started to set in, but I took a breath and relaxed myself, looking for a chance to escape. I glanced at the door locks. They were unlocked still, thankfully. I sat there. Every second seemed to take a minute to pass. I tried to open my mouth to make small talk as I was worried that this guy was getting suspicious, but it might just have been my paranoia. "Not long now, I'm looping back around," he said. I nodded and tried to smile. Soon, I saw a McDonald's on the corner of a semi-busy intersection, and as I spotted this, the traffic light we were approaching turned red. My chance was here. I pulled the door handle as hard as I could, kicking the door open, and ran towards the small crowds of people that were congregated out in front of the McDonald's. I guess I made some noise because they all started staring as I ran towards them. "That guy tried to kidnap me," I struggled to say as I got closer. I then heard the screeching of tires and horns honking as the driver floored the car and blew the red light, speeding out of sight. I sat down, people came around to ask me if I was okay, and one man actually jumped on his motorcycle and tried to chase the guy, but it was too late. I called the police and a friend to come pick me up. Thankfully, a lot of people saw the car and were able to give the police a good description, and I described the driver as best as I could. But that said, I still haven't heard anything back from the police yet. When they were there, they were telling me that this started happening more and more often lately. Random people would cruise around bars and other busy places and try to find someone by themselves looking for an Uber and lure them into their car. I don't know what would have happened if I stayed in the car, but I'm glad I didn't find out. Please, if you take anything away from what happened to me, just don't be in a rush like I was and pay attention to details. If I would have just checked and made sure the plates and the make of the Uber car matched, this could have all been avoided. Learn from me, and always make sure to double check. Stay safe out there.
"Son, there's nothing in the dark that isn't there in the light," my father used to tell me when he found me screaming in my bed. Though I am sure his words were meant to comfort me, my young mind understood a more disturbing implication. My dad wanted me to think that I was as safe in the dark as I was in the light, but it sounded as though I was as vulnerable in the light as I was in the dark. I knew there were monsters in my room, and it terrified me to realize that I could not cast them away with the power of my lamp or the flashlight I kept under my pillow. Turning on the light only meant being able to see the creatures that lurked in the darkness, and that seemed far more horrific. Every night I trembled in my bed, dreading the day when the monsters would finally decide to turn me into a midnight snack. One night, when I was 7, I was woken up by the sound of the phone ringing. I crawled out of bed to eavesdrop on my dad. There was an emergency at work, and he needed to leave urgently. He called my babysitter, who was used to his late-night requests and already knew where to find the spare key. I walked to my window and peered outside in time to catch Dad jumping into his van and driving off. His headlights momentarily blinded me and stripped away what little night vision I had garnered up until then. As I turned towards my bed, I spotted something standing on the other side. I nearly peed myself. Squinting to get a better look, I found that my vision was hindered by a collection of fading bright spots still pulsating in my retinas. "Who's there?" I asked in a pathetic whimper. I reached for my lamp, but became paralyzed with fear, remembering my father's words. There's nothing in the dark that isn't there in the light. It would be pointless to turn on the light. The figure swayed back and forth silently in an almost hypnotic rhythm. I remember hearing it hissing and making a strange dripping sound. As a row of cars passed in the street, light poured in through my windows. I started to make out the creature's details. Its arms were twisted and bony. Its hands were a trio of clawed fingers that reminded me of a bird's talons. It had 3 spikes jutting out of each side of its bald head. Its eyes glowed like those of a cat in the night, and it wore a loose robe that, as far as I could tell, was made up of light leather with strands of hair attached to it. I had watched enough cowboy and Indian movies to know what a scalp was when I saw one. I wanted to scream and run, but I couldn't move. Strangely, the creature did not approach me. Instead, it lurked over my empty bed. Pure luck had bunched the blankets up in such a way as to make it seem like I was still under them. Even as the light faded away, I could see one of the monster's talons slowly reaching towards my blanket. It gripped onto the top and pulled it back, revealing the empty bed. The demonic being stretched its abnormally long neck, peering at the spot where I should have been. It made a series of eerie clicking sounds, just like when you smack your tongue against your palate. When it realized that the bed was empty, it emitted a shrill shriek so loud that I had to cover my ears. I remember that sound so vividly, even to this day. It was like a police siren, but 10 times louder and somehow more offensive. Lights once again erupted through my window as my babysitter came up the driveway. Her headlights enabled me to see each and every unsettling detail on the creature's horrific face. I could see its sunken golden eyes, its nostrils sitting in the middle of its noseless face, and its eerily tiny mouth. The mouth formed a perfect circle about the size of the cap on a water bottle and was lined with tiny sharp fangs. Some sort of blackish ooze drizzled out of its sleepless maw and landed on the bed, soaking into my Ninja Turtles comforter. For some reason, that mouth terrified me more than anything in my life. Just when I thought I could not feel more frightened, it turned its angry head towards me. Its long neck stretched out in my direction, and I thought I was a goner. Fred Wilkins, 162 Vanier Lane. He'll be much yummier, I told it desperately, selling out the jerk that bullied me to save my own skin. The creature retracted suddenly and melted between the floorboards. I'm not sure whether it accepted my offering or if the sound of my front door opening spooked it, but it was gone. I ran out of my room, crying my eyes out. I couldn't tell my babysitter what had happened, but she thankfully understood how frightened I was and let me sleep in the living room while she watched infomercials on TV. Fred was missing from school the next day, and we were told a few days later that his family up and moved overnight. To this day, I do not know whether that was true or whether it was some sort of cover-up to keep our class from freaking out. The creature returned to visit me about once a season. Each time I gave it another address. Sometimes it was the address of someone I knew, sometimes it would be random, and I would hope for the best. The monster would disappear and leave me alone until its hunger grew again. I started noticing more and more missing children posters when Dad and I went grocery shopping. I felt guilty, but no amount of guilt could win against my fear. Besides, the other kids deserved it, right? If they were so smart, they would have done like me and told the demonic figure to go eat someone else. I tried to reason my guilt away, but in the back of my mind, I knew the truth. The kids on those posters were never coming back. The last time I saw the creature, I was 11 years old. The moon was casting an unsettling amount of light into my room. I could feel the beast lingering over me while I hid under the covers. I could hear its shallow breathing and feel my blanket dampening from the black drool coming out of its mouth. It didn't matter how many times I had seen the monster, I never wanted to fully look at it ever again. I closed my eyes tightly, desperately trying to remember an address to give it. I felt its talon gripping my blanket. I heard it make that familiar clicking sound, and I panicked. My mind was a blur, and I could not come up with the address I'd been rehearsing for weeks in anticipation of his visit. If you let me leave, you can have my kids when I grow up, I blurted out. The creature paused, as though contemplating the offer. I heard its footsteps as it distanced itself from me, and I slowly pulled the blankets away from my face. It gave me one last look. Its tiny fangs twitched a couple of times. I could have sworn I saw it nod as it slowly disappeared into the floor. Honey, there's nothing in the dark that isn't there in the light, I told my daughter last night when her screams woke me up. My daughter said there were monsters in her room. I assured her that there was no such thing as monsters. There is nothing worse than living in fear. I knew that from experience. I reached for her teddy bear, which was sitting dutifully on the shelf, and handed it to her. Mr. Scuzzles will protect you, I offered calmly. She took the bear and hugged it close as she continued to cry and beg for a nightlight. I refused to get her one. I don't want her to see it when it comes for her. God help me, no one should have to see that thing.
Have you ever taken acid? I doubt that you have. I'm about to try it out in a moment for the first time in my life. Honestly, I believe I'm entitled to it. After the shitty life I've led, call me what you will, but this is just the way I feel things must go. It all started when my wife, Claudia, divorced me a month and a half ago. She meant the world to me, and the idea she could even consider leaving me was alien to my mind. Then I found out about the affair she had had. A man who I always considered to be a high school buddy of mine suddenly became the worst enemy I ever knew. I actually managed to get into a bar fight with that particular person. But what did it solve? Absolutely nothing, and all I got for it was a bloody nose and broken arm for my troubles. That wasn't even the worst of it. What killed me was when she took the kids. That was the blow that destroyed my very life as I knew it. Both my precious little children were torn from my loving arms to spend their entire lives with a cold-hearted woman that could never love them as I did. I take the acid quickly before I can change my mind, and then wash it down with a shot of scotch. According to the internet, consuming hydrochloric acid is a very effective form of suicide.
Can you feel it? I know you can. That thing when you wake up late at night shivering, it is watching. You try shutting all of the doors, windows, and curtains. Whatever. Just trying to escape the feeling, thinking it's the crisp chill of the night. But you know you're wrong. You try to take pills, drink, eat anything. It keeps you up at night though, causing you constant discomfort. It wakes you up with a hot sweat nearly every night, looking around frantically, feeling sick with fright. It gets closer as you rub your eyes, clearing them of the blur. As you do so, it gets closer and closer till you can almost smell its pungent breath over your sweaty red face. You know your time is almost up on this earth, but you don't want it to have the satisfaction of ending you. You're stronger, at least you think you are. You go to the medicine cupboard and take one last glance at your reflection on the mirror on it. The blinds over the bathroom mirror are swaying in the cool breeze, but the windows are all shut. Your eyes are bloodshot and bags hang from underneath them, black as the midnight sky. You caress the cold touch of the mirror as you watch his eyes widen from the gloomy doorway behind you, a malicious smile now on his bony face. You reach into the medicine cabinet and pull out a tub of sleeping pills. Hesitant, you remember what the people had told you. You can be around anything long enough to become tolerant of it. You wonder if that works with the bad memories that still haunt you to this day. That is, until you perish the thought and rest your forehead against the cool surface of the bathroom mirror. Your eyes begin to tear slightly. It just watches and anticipates the ending, almost like a brilliant horror film, the sort of stuff you used to like watching. You open the tub, taking your time. No escape now. It's closing in on you. You signal it to stop with a shaking hand. Its harsh smile soon turns into a frown, but it does as you say. You reach into the tub and pull out a hand of pills. They were miniature, but dosage of maximum 2 recommended a day. As it read on the label you took little time to examine. 2 would be too little to end your pain now. You find yourself crying uncontrollably as you pop each of your last few pills individually into the inside of your bone-dry mouth. His face once again recovers as you find yourself choking in a regret of what has become of you, struggling to swallow. A stabbing pain passes into your ribcage, then into your heart. You fall to the cold tiled floor, drooling and cursing at the eyes of death. It watches you mercilessly until your eyes are blurred and you begin to drift away, your last breath of life escaping from your lungs. You see it, for a little while, in your head, the feeling of the darkness still lingering with its eyes still staring. You stare at it back for a while. That is, until it begins to fade away as the dark side of your mind retreats away, and a calming light is in the distance before you as the word cheater echoes in the darkness around you, followed by a deep, unsettling laugh. This does not stop you from cracking a pleasant smile for the first time for as long as you remember. As you walk into the light ahead, you wake up to the safety of a hospital bed. The room is quiet and peaceful. You are at peace for the first time in a long time. At the foot of your bed stand two familiar faces, a man and a woman. You remember them as if you saw them a long time ago, but somehow they still remain vaguely on the edge of your mind. They smile warmly at you, skin pale as a ghost. You smile back, feeling reassured and safe in the eyes of these people. You pull yourself from the bed, not saying a word. You feel nothing, not even the brisk feeling of your bare feet on the ground below you. You walk over to them, who are smiling at you. You walk hand in hand, not knowing why you trust them, but something in your conscience tells you to. Not feeling the need to question your actions, you begin to walk out of the single clinic room and into the growing mist of nothingness.
Jen and I love Halloween. We go all out when decorating our house and yard. The neighborhood kids love to see what we put up every year, and even their parents are impressed by the scale and sophistication of the decorations we use. We don't just give out candy, we invite the trick-or-treaters into our home to see our setup. Pumpkins, spiders, skeletons, ghosts, you name it, we've got it. Our local newspaper even did a feature on us last year. A safe and spooky spot for local kids. It wasn't much more of a fluff piece, but it felt good to have our work celebrated. A project Jen's been working on over the last 15 years or so is her Halloween town of horrors. It's the centerpiece of our trick-or-treat trip around the house. The town takes up our whole dining room table, and it's a darker take on those big Christmas villages that people like to put out in December. The architecture is very Tim Burton-esque. Lots of strange looking buildings, exaggerated colors, and blood splatters. While the townsfolk lurk in the shadows like little purple zombies and space aliens. As the years have gone by, Jen's taken her Halloween town from a couple of small buildings to the sprawling, popular Nightmarescape it is today. This year, Halloween came and went. We had a blast. Jen's Halloween town was a huge hit. Even adults from around the neighborhood came over to take a look. Jen loved the attention. She wanted to be an artist growing up, but sadly, it wouldn't pay the bills. As we cleaned the house, Jen picked up one of the townsfolk dolls. Its clothing had a little tear that needed to be fixed. Sighing good-naturedly, she gathered the rest of them into their box. I love those dolls. Their aesthetic works beautifully within the town Jen puts them in. They range in size from a raisin to a lemon. Some have distinguishable features, others don't. It takes a while for her to make each one, between 2 and 5 months. But her effort always yields a product that's perfect for Halloween. Until she can carry one to term, we both agree they shouldn't go to waste.
I sat on the bus on my way to school, listening to music and paying little to no attention to the other students. At one of the stops, my mind snapped back to reality. I looked toward the small house. Tommy's house, I thought. A hand slipped through the drapes of the window and waved the bus driver to move on. He's sick, I thought, paying no large amount of attention to the situation. The day flew by. I watched the local news channel after school, and what I heard paralyzed me. Tommy's entire family was murdered that day by an unknown suspect. After hearing this news, I moved back up to my room and quietly fell asleep. The next day I sat on the bus. We drove past Tommy's house, and the bus driver, unaware of Tommy's family's fate, stopped at his home. As I was about to get up and explain to her what had happened, something caught my eye. A pale hand slipped through the drapes of the window and waved the bus driver to move on. I sat on the bus terrified.
For some context, this story happened when I was about a 13 or 14-year-old girl. I was a stereotypical tomboy. I didn't enjoy dolls, but I did love basketball and video games. My sister Carla, on the other hand, was very girly. She enjoyed makeup, dress up, and dolls. She had several, most of them Barbies, but she had one in particular that still haunts me. This doll had stringy blue hair and 2 black buttons for eyes. The dress was a traditional floral pattern, complete with little plastic shoes. The origin of this doll is a complete mystery. My grandmother had it when she was a little girl, and when she passed, my father found it in her attic. My parents are divorced, so that meant either I or my sister were going to take it. And since I hated dolls, it went to Carla. Anyway, my sister had this strange obsession with that doll, and it was almost instant. Whenever we did anything or went anywhere, that doll came with us. My dad didn't think it was strange at all, and if I complained about it, I was immediately shut down and told to keep quiet. The first weird incident with this doll happened within days of my sister receiving it. It was in the middle of the night. I heard Carla talking. Well, she was more whispering, and I couldn't really understand her, but she was also giggling a lot. Annoyed, I sat up and turned on the light. "Who are you talking to?" I asked. She looked me straight in the eye and, with no expression on her face, said simply, "Sylvia." I happened to notice that right behind her was the doll, presumably Sylvia. "Shut up, okay? You're too damn loud." I turned off the lamp and laid my head back down. But after a few moments, my sister began whispering and giggling again. "Carla, shut up. You shut up." I sat up and turned the light on again to see my sister sitting on her bed facing me with Sylvia. "Shut up before I hit Dad," I said. Carla folded her arms and, with the same expressionless face, claimed it wasn't her. I rolled my eyes, called her a liar, told her to shut up again, and turned off the light. A few minutes later, I heard it again. More giggling and laughing. I had it. In a fit of irritation, I turned on the lights and saw my sister again, sitting on her bed, facing Sylvia. Now, me being older, I had a tendency to be a bit of a witch to my sister. I was 6 years older, and sharing a room with a 7-year-old could get annoying, but it also meant that since I was bigger, I made all the rules. Without saying so much as one word, I kicked off my covers and marched over to my sister's bed. I grabbed her Sylvia doll, opened our bedroom door, and chucked her down the stairs, her soft body and shoes causing a subtle thud as she connected with the floor below. I then climbed back in my bed and glared at my sister. Surprisingly, though, she didn't move. She didn't frown, wasn't upset, she wasn't even crying. She just had the same plastic look on her face, and without so much of a smirk, she slowly began shaking her head at me. "You shouldn't have done that," she whispered. I rolled my eyes. "Shut up, Carla." Carla then got under her covers and turned away from me. This was strange because usually when I'm mean to her, she starts crying and runs for our dad, but this time she did nothing. It was odd, but I laid back down to go to sleep. For the next, what I assumed to be hours, everything was fine. I had fallen asleep, and so had, I assume, Carla. But that's when it happened. I heard some clicking noises. At first, I thought I was just dreaming, but then I heard them again. And again. They were soft, but distinct. I sat up and looked over at Carla's bed. I couldn't see her per se, but I could make out a lump underneath the covers of her bed, so I assumed she was still there. Then I heard the clicking again. It sounded almost like footsteps, but not heavy ones. They were small and quick, almost running, and they were coming from the other side of the door. "Dad? Carla?" I called. Nothing. I wrote it off again as a dream and lay back down to go to sleep. My eyes weren't closed for more than a minute when I heard a creaking noise. I sat up and turned on the lamp. I looked over my shoulder and saw Carla sound asleep in her bed. However, our door was cracked open. It wasn't immediately noticeable, but it was definitely cracked. I couldn't remember if I had shut it or not, so it didn't necessarily strike me as odd. I figured maybe there was a breeze moving our door, causing it to creak. I got out of bed and went to shut the door softly as to not wake my father or Carla. As I shut the door, I heard the little scuttles again. You know, those clicking noises. But now they were coming from inside the room. I thought maybe we had a mouse or something. This happened before, as our house wasn't exactly in the nicest of areas, and we lived across the street from a huge field. I went into the hall closet and shuffled through some things to get a mouse trap to place in our room like we usually did. I was looking down at the trap, trying to unwrap it as I entered the room, but when I looked up, I immediately dropped the trap on the floor and froze, because there, on the edge of Carla's bed, was Sylvia. Carla was in the same spot behind her, completely knocked out and snoring. I stood there for a moment, thinking someone was playing a trick on me. I looked out into the hallway to see if my dad's door was open. Maybe he went to the bathroom and found Sylvia on the floor. No. Sylvia was at the bottom of the stairs, so that couldn't have been it. And I would have heard Carla's bed squeal if she had gotten up to follow me out of the room. I then slowly turned back to face Carla and Sylvia. Sylvia was sitting there as if she had been placed in that specific spot, and she was looking directly at me. Carla? I whispered. She didn't move. Carla, I said with a little more force. She rolled over and opened one eye. She looked at me for a moment and then noticed Sylvia. Without saying a word, she grabbed Sylvia under her arm, rolled back over, and went to sleep. I was completely freaked out, but tried to get the incident out of my mind. I didn't dare turn off the light, though. I slowly crept back to my bed and tried to fall asleep. And at some point, I did pass out. Next thing I remember, it was morning and my alarm was going off for school. I reached over and turned it off, completely forgetting about Sylvia's little trick the night before. Well, that is, until I went to turn the light on. No sooner had I flicked the switch did I remember that I had fallen asleep with the light on. So, what was it doing off? I looked back over at Carla and she was still sound asleep. Then, I looked in front of me, and sitting at the foot of my bed, staring at me, was Sylvia. I screamed and jumped out of my bed, running directly for my dad's room. He was already in the bathroom down the hall shaving when I ran in there telling him about Sylvia. He at first had no clue who Sylvia was until I identified her as the doll. He went into our room, but Sylvia was no longer on my bed. Instead, she was tucked neatly underneath Carla's arm as she continued to sleep. My dad told me to stop being ridiculous and to get ready for school as he shook Carla awake. I continued protesting, but My dad gave me that one more word and you're going to get it look before shutting the door. I told you, you shouldn't have done that. I turned around and Carla was standing behind me, holding Sylvia by her right hand. Keep that freaky thing away from me. Carla smirked, but the creepy part was what she said next. Oh, and Sylvia doesn't like the light on. She can only sleep when it's dark. Carla then walked casually past me to the restroom, still holding Sylvia by her hand. The rest of the morning went on as usual, except I was visibly shaken. I didn't touch my cereal because I was far too upset. Carla, on the other hand, began acting normal again, all happy and giddy, nothing like the night before. And I wish this was the end of it, but it's not. My dad was in the bathroom combing Carla's hair as I prepared to get on my bus, but as the bus drove away from my house, I swear I saw Sylvia sitting in the window, and this was the only first of many strange occurrences with this doll. Over the next several years, that doll would end up in the weirdest places. One time, she was even on top of the refrigerator, and another time, we found her underneath the bathroom sink. My dad kept telling Carla to stop putting her toys in random places, but Carla claimed that Sylvia was just adventurous. It took about 2 or 3 years, but eventually Carla outgrew Sylvia and in turn handed her down to our little cousin Marcy. The only reason I took the time to write this story was because of, well, what Marcy had said the other night while we were at her house. We were eating dinner at our aunt's place. My aunt was talking about Sylvia, about how much our grandmother talked about that doll and how much she loved her, but mentioned how she kept ending up in the oddest places. I said that I found the doll creepy and I didn't like it. And that's when Marcy said it. That's okay. Sylvia doesn't like you because you threw her down the stairs. Now, everyone else at the table continued with the conversation, but not me. See, Marcy, she's only 4. So when I threw Sylvia down the stairs, not only was she not in the house, but even if she was, she'd be too young to remember it. Now, I'm not saying this doll is haunted, but it still gives me the creeps.
Still no messages on my phone. I guess he wasn't going to call me back after all. I can't really blame him. Maybe I came on a bit too fast yesterday. I had noticed him long before he noticed me. His shiny black hair and unnatural blue eyes. I wasn't the only one watching him, that's for sure. His movements were elegant in a boyish way, and his smile. I would die for that smile. Still no messages. I thought about calling him, maybe apologize for going too fast yesterday. I'm a coward, I know, but I just couldn't bring myself to dial his number. Besides, he'd promised he'd contact me when he's ready. So I'll wait. I'm patient. I know, I'll just casually stroll past his house, just to see if he's home. Maybe he's out. That would explain why he couldn't call me yet. He only lives half an hour away anyway. Maybe he's shy and is scared to call me. Silly boy. I'll go to him and tell him that he doesn't have to be scared, that I don't mind if he needs time. He lives pretty secluded in a farm on the outskirts of town. I can hear the sheep in the stables as I approach. My heart skips when I see there's lights burning inside. He must be there. He told me yesterday his parents would be gone for the weekend. They left him to look after the sheep for those days. Poor baby, that must be hard work. He was probably just too busy to call me. I'll have to stay here until his parents come back and help him take care of all those sheep. I knock on the door, but he doesn't answer. Maybe he fell asleep? The thought of his beautiful face, even more softened by sleep, makes me smile. I try the door. It's unlocked. There's hardly any crime around here, so I guess locking the door is not needed. I try to be as quiet as possible as I sneak through the house. I want to surprise him. I cringe at every creak the stairs make as I climb them. Finally, I've reached the bedroom and I carefully open the door. There he is, lying in bed as I thought. Quietly, I switch on the nightlight on his desk so I can see his face. His blue eyes are open, staring into space, and his whole face is one bloody mess. His cheeks have been carved, the skin mostly removed and hanging loose on the sides of his face. He's missing his fingernails. They are laid out on the bed, carefully arranged. On his bare chest, words are carved. I look at him, my hands covering my mouth. He's still the same as I left him yesterday. He must have been so tired that he slept all day. How cute! I softly kiss his forehead, making sure I don't wake him. Then I write another message below the one on his chest, letting him know that I'm here when he needs me. I leave the room, heading back outside. I think it's time for the sheep to go to sleep. And tomorrow, I'll introduce myself to his parents. I'm sure they'll love me too.
Another bouquet of flowers showed up today. That's the third one this week. They're beautiful flowers, they really are. Roses and lilies, bursts of colors and baby's breath, lovely arrangements that would make anyone happy to receive. Yet every time they arrive, I can't help but feel a stab of fear. I guess I should explain. This all started back in college when I started dating this guy. We'll call him Mike. He was a nice enough guy, we just weren't really compatible. I don't know. It didn't work out, for the same reason a lot of things in college don't work out. And I never would have given it a second thought or even really remember him at all if it weren't for the flowers. The first bouquet showed up the week after our last date. After I texted him to say this isn't working out. They were vibrant blue chrysanthemums and white roses, and they came with no note or explanation. They merely appeared on the welcome mat in front of my apartment door. I waited for him to try and follow up, to get back together with me, but he never did. I even texted him to thank him for the flowers, and he insisted he didn't send them. But of course he'd say that. But then, in a few weeks, another bouquet arrived, and then another, and the week after that, a third. And pretty soon, the flowers were coming every week. When I moved out of my apartment, they were waiting for me at my new address. When I got a job in a different state, they arrived at my workplace, placed cheerfully on my desk. I called and texted Mike, trying to get him to stop, but I kept getting a message failed, or this number has been disconnected. I guess he changed his number. Maybe he didn't want me calling to harass him. The flowers kept coming, and I started to get creeped out. How did he know where I lived? How did he keep finding me? I changed my phone number. I moved. I became meticulous about hiding my identity online. I called the florists and begged them to put me on a no-deliver list. I even called the police and tried to file a report that I was being stalked. Let me tell you, trying to get the police to do something about a guy delivering you flowers? Not an easy task. But nothing I did could keep the flowers from coming. They just kept showing up every week and then twice a week. For nearly 3 years now. No matter where I live or where I work, somehow the flowers just keep coming. Which brings us to today, and the newest bouquet. Usually, when I get them, I'm exasperated, or a little uneasy, or just plain mad. But lately, I've been getting more and more scared, because I was on Facebook the other day, prowling through friends of friends and old classmates, snooping around the way you do when you've had a couple of drinks and a free evening. And I found Mike's Facebook page. It was covered in messages of mourning and memorial. Mike's been dead for nearly 3 years.
My mother passed away a year ago. She had no will, and I was the only child, so I inherited the house by default. I didn't want to go back, but finally I decided it was time. To start, I would sort through her belongings and decide what to keep. Her closet would be a no-brainer, as I had no desire to keep an old woman's clothes around. I grabbed a bag and pulled her dresses off the hangers. Once the closet was empty, I noticed something. A piece of drywall had clearly been cut out and replaced. I reached behind it and pulled out a jewelry box. This was it, the small fortune I always hoped she'd had saved for me. That's what I thought anyways. Inside of the jewelry box was a ton of pictures she had drawn of herself throughout her childhood. There was an unfamiliar girl next to her in every picture. At first, I thought it was my grandma, but she had passed away when my mom was only 2. These pictures were all drawn after her death. Finally, at the bottom of the box, there was a note that she dated a few days before she passed. I'm so sorry, dear. I tried to take her with me in my passing, but she wanted to stay and play some more. You must keep her happy. Your aunt was in an accident and was taken before I was born. I made sure you didn't meet her as a child, so you would have a normal life. She's ready to meet you now. I felt a cold touch on my arm and turned to see.
Fear returns. My name is Ben, and I am going to tell you that I have met Fear himself, and slowly he is going to return. This is how I first met him. I went camping for a couple of days. On the first day, nothing happened. But on the second day, in the middle of the night, I awoke to a sniffing sound at my tent. I got my gun and went outside, and there was a bear. I shot at it, but I had forgot to load my gun. When I thought I was about to die, time seemed to freeze. I heard a voice say, I said, how do I not? But he only said again. So I said, no. The voice said then, you are having a painful future. I said, who are you? And he thought he was gonna say something like he is a monster, but only he said, then everything unfroze. Before the bear killed me, a dart hit it and someone had shot it. Next day, I awoke with scars all over my body, and now I am afraid of Fear, and he will return. What waits for me is going to happen soon. Wait. What's happening? Do you accept your fate? Yes. Very well. Good boy. Because I have returned.
Long-time lurker, first-time poster. You know that jazz. Okay, this just happened an hour ago. My boyfriend just told me this in the POV of my boyfriend. So when I say I, it's my boyfriend's point of view. It was around 11 p.m. on a hot Texas night. I was laying down FaceTiming my girlfriend. My dad yelled, "Come here," so I ran to him. He said that there's someone on our property. My dad's a redneck. Anyway, my dad grabbed his gun and we went out to look. We walked around the house, right by Mom's room. I see a tall man, mid-30s. He is peeking into my mom's room window and masturbating. The guy seen us and continued. He was licking his lips and moaning. My dad pulled out his gun and the man started running through the fields. So guys, that beats his meat to my boyfriend's mom. Let's not meet, you sicko.
As our car made a right turn off the main highway and onto the old country road, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. My heavy anticipation for where we were headed had been temporarily subdued by the tick-tock sound of the turn signal and the large, unique structure my mom and I were slowly driving by. My eyes were fascinatingly fixed on it. I've always been interested in old houses like this, a strange sort of fondness. Only this house was of a certain variety that I had only seen in movies. "I knew you'd love this house," Mom said with excitement and a big smile. "It's been years since I've seen it myself, but with how you like those scary movies so much, I knew you would notice it." It was true. The mysterious old house had grabbed my attention and held a firm grasp as it got smaller and smaller through the back window of the car as we accelerated. My head had been completely on a swivel for a second. I was 12 years old, and for those brief moments, the house completely distracted and bewildered me. It was 3 stories, white with baby blue shutters. There were also 2 large columns in the front, with little balconies for each of the upstairs windows. I knew nothing about architecture, but it resembled the plantation style, and although it was aged and weathered, it seemed to be in good shape on the outside. It looked extremely out of place though, since most of the surrounding houses in the area were quite a bit smaller and more modern. "I've never seen a house like that around here. It's probably the oldest house in the whole county," she said with a good amount of certainty. The yard had been maintained, but it looked lonely. "Does anyone live in it?" I asked with a genuine look of curiosity on my face. No one's lived there for years. It's been like that since I was your age. Me and my friends always thought it was haunted," she said as she popped her gum loudly. "Well, what about the owners? Who owns it?" I asked. "The last I heard, the owner is an old woman who lives in another state. North Carolina maybe, or Georgia. I can't remember. My mother was driving me to my friend James' house and I was going to be staying the night for the first time. I had never been there before, and other than him telling me it was old, I really didn't know what to expect. Nevertheless, I was excited the whole way there. I was eagerly clutching the tied ends of the plastic Walmart bags which contained my collection of video games and gaming magazines that I was quite proud of. My best friend and I had known each other since the 2nd grade, and we had a lot of fun together. We played video games, laughed a lot, watched MTV, and did plenty of exploring outside. We often discussed girls, as most boys did, and we would rank each girl we knew from top to bottom based on looks alone. It was a warm summer evening, and with no clouds in sight, the sun still had plenty of shining to do before the day would be over. Perfect weather to start what was looking to be a fun-filled weekend. James and his family lived about a half-mile past the decrepit-looking house, and as we took a slight curve around some lumbering oak trees, my eyes caught a sudden glimpse of something huge and white, far off to the right, sitting in the middle of what looked like a large field. It was another towering old home. I soon learned from Mom that this is James's house. "This is it. I haven't seen this place in forever," she said as she started up the long gravel driveway. "I forgot how pretty it was out here." It was Victorian style with a charming yet somewhat unnerving look about it. I had no idea he lived in a house like this, but I was glad he did. I thought it was awesome, and I couldn't wait to check it out. The place had seen better days, with much of the wood siding being riddled and heavily chipped, battle marks and blemishes from well over 100 years of Mother Nature bearing down on it. Yes, it was that old. I found out that it was built in the late 1800s. The yard was enormous, and I remember him telling me that he mowed it with one of those massive cutting blades that were attached to a small trailer with wheels, which he pulled with his four-wheeler, and it made sense to me now. It was peaceful back in this hollow, and it was nestled in the far outskirts of a small southeastern Kentucky town. James and I were distant relatives, and we didn't find this out until after our friendship began. His mom was a first cousin to my grandma, so somewhere down the line this made us cousins. Far off, of course, but we both thought it was great that we were connected through family like this. Mom parked the car at the end of the driveway that wrapped around part of the house and ended close to the back entrance. There was also a large porch here, complete with old-looking chairs and a table. We were parked in front of an above-ground cellar made with concrete blocks, which I would later find out only served as storage room for his dad's beer. A good-sized garden with what appeared to be freshly tilled dirt was situated further back, closer to where the grass met the lofty pine trees at the edge of the woods. When we got out of the car, I looked toward the window next to the porch and saw a still figure of someone peering out at us. It was James. I heard the sliding door open quickly as him and his mom came out to greet us. "Why, hello, Pam. How in the world have you been?" his mom asked with a smile. Sherry had a warm personality. She was short in stature, wore glasses, and kept her hair about shoulder length with plenty of grays peeking through. "Hey, Sherry, I've been fine. You been okay?" "It's so pretty out here, and I love your house." They were both enthusiastic and exchanged hugs while catching up and talking about the family, as well as Sherry's recent weight loss and how good she looked. Of course, she complimented my mom on her looks as well. All the usual pleasantries and gossip between parents. She invited Mom to come inside, to which my mom said she wished she could, but had some earlier obligations and time-sensitive errands to run, so we told each other bye and hugged, and she left. "Just make yourself at home, sweetie," Sherry said, giving me a pat on the back. "I've got to go in there and help Charles with something." Charles was James's dad. We stepped through the sliding doors and into the kitchen. James could tell I was just looking around, trying to see all there was to see. He could tell I was interested in this house. "Pretty big house, isn't it?" he said. "Yeah, it's huge. I'd like to see the rest of it. And what about that crazy-looking house at the beginning of the road? I've never seen a house like that." I was hoping he'd know some history on the place, or maybe some insane rumors that probably weren't true. I love stories about old houses, no matter how ridiculous and exaggerated they usually were. I've heard that it was built back in the 1800s, like this house. And I also heard that people have died in it, but I don't know," he said. "There are a lot of stories about it, but I don't know anyone who's been inside of it. The people who own it live somewhere far off." He started looking through my gaming magazines I brought. "I can't believe it hasn't been broken into or destroyed by some of the druggies and thieves around here," I said. He nodded his head in agreement. "Yeah, me either. Maybe people are too afraid to mess with it. Come on, I'll show you the rest of the house. Grab your things." I followed him through the house, paying attention to every little detail I could. The room that connected the kitchen to the living room was huge, and it had a treadmill, a deep freezer, and a desktop computer sitting on a desk with a Windows 98 screensaver enabled. In the living room, I see the top of a man's head sitting in a recliner. He was drinking a Budweiser in a can, with all of his attention focused on a boxing match he was watching on TV. He had black hair, looked to be in his late 40s or early 50s, and was skinny. We stood next to his chair so I could meet him. He moved his head in our direction and looked at us with the most perplexed look. It was honestly a funny-looking expression and almost made me bust out laughing. James breaks the ice. "This is Daniel, Dad. You know, Daniel, our cousin." "He's probably drunk," James whispered, seeming not to care if the old man heard him or not. Charles finally speaks. "Hey, you bastards. Nice to meet you, Daniel. Either of you assholes know how to till a garden?" He laughed. He was obviously hammered, and he proved James' assumptions to be accurate. I laughed heartily and raised my hand to meet his for a shake. "Hey, Charles, nice to meet you too. I've helped out in a garden once or twice, but that's about it." I could already tell that I liked him because he was funny. He kept plenty of Budweiser on hand at all times and made funny facial expressions and comments. He wasn't one of those violent alcoholics. James told me this before, and I was seeing that now. James had also told me that Charles had been in the Vietnam War and took a bullet to the chin, which was a close encounter with death and left a scar which ran from the center of his chin to the uppermost portion of where his neck began. It was obvious that James was ashamed of his father's alcohol problem, and from what I understood, Charles wasn't just a weekend drinker either. He had never been able to kick the habit, which I'm sure had probably created a barrier or put some sort of strain on the family dynamic, as it often does. "Come on, I'll show you the rest of the house," James said, motioning me through the living room to the steep staircase. "This is my mom and dad's room," he said as he pointed to a large room next to the staircase. It was carpeted and had what appeared to be a king-size bed. It wasn't the tidiest looking room, and it had 2 piles of clothes lying around. I noticed another computer in the corner. "This hallway next to the stairs goes to the bathroom, and my bedroom is upstairs. You want to go up and play some games?" "Yeah, let's go," I said. We head up the steep staircase, and as we step on the linoleum of the second floor, I notice how old and tattered it is, and what looked like pieces of newspaper or something underneath. I bent down to get a closer look, and that's exactly what it was. Bits and pieces of newspapers. These weren't just any newspapers though, they were dated as far back as the 1800s. I came across several larger sections that were left intact, with random dates and articles. I pulled the papers out just enough to where I could read them without taking them out completely from underneath the flooring. Although as old and torn as it was, I doubt it really mattered. Gosh, look at all these papers, I said. These are news articles from over a century ago. James, who was several steps ahead of me, turned around and smiled. Yeah, I know. There are hundreds of them under all the flooring up here. They used it as some type of insulation, I think, but I don't know who put them there. None of the news articles that I saw were particularly interesting or noteworthy, but I thought it was cool anyway. I hadn't known of anyone doing this before. Do you know they used to have a public court in our yard a long time ago? There have been people hanged before, right in our front yard. James said this as he was plugging the Sony PlayStation into the back of a big floor model TV. No way. Are you serious? How do you know? I asked inquisitively. Historical Society. We've seen pictures and everything. It was literally right in our front yard. I forgot how many hangings there were, but I know it was a lot. That's insane, I say. I liked horror movies, and all this was a lot to take in. Everything from the house at the beginning of the road to the house I was now standing in, to the history of the land. It was a lot for me to think about. I loved it. Before we sat down to play a game called Silent Hill, which was supposed to be a horror lover's dream, I noticed this room had tan-colored carpet and an old wooden door on the opposite end of the room, which led to a large porch that overlooked the whole front yard and driveway. The sun had started its evening routine of slowly hiding itself behind the mountains before completely leaving the darkness, the moon and the night stars to fill the land. An evening view that I would find to be beautiful is in front of me. A large tobacco field, exquisitely maintained, with the brownest, richest-looking dirt providing a more than adequate home for the roots of the vibrant, deep green leaves sprouting above. A cool breeze is sweeping through, an inviting briskness across my cheeks. I stare out at the land once more, take one deep breath into my lungs, exhale, and make my way back into the bedroom, where James has already started playing the game. I sat down in front of the TV, the bright globe beaming on me, and watched him play for a bit. The lights were off and it took my eyes a minute to adjust. I could already tell the game was dark, creepy, and intense. After about an hour, we saved our progress and switched over to another game. I was snapping the Silent Hill game case closed when I heard footsteps coming up the stairs. Staring into the doorway with the steps getting nearer, I watched for someone to appear. Gradually illuminated by the television glow, a recognizable face came into view. You boys want something to eat? I've got meatloaf, green beans, mashed potatoes, and cornbread on the table. I've got a peanut butter pie for dessert. Better hurry before Charles eats it all. It was Sherry, James's mom. I was starving, and with each of the things she listed, my stomach seemed to growl with approval. She flipped the light on in the upstairs hallway, and we followed her to the stairs. As we passed to the other upstairs bedroom, which I hadn't paid attention to on the way up, she pointed inside. Lord, this room is a mess. Just look over it, Daniel. We've more or less just started using it as a junk room since nobody ever goes in there. I couldn't see much in the room. It was indeed messy though, with random things scattered about. It was dark, but right before my eyes turned away and moved onto the stairs, I noticed a big square piece of wood that had apparently been nailed into the wall of the dark, cluttered room. I wondered what that was for. The smell of home cooking filled my nostrils as we made our way to the kitchen table. I wanted to ask James what that piece of wood was for, but I felt weird asking in front of his parents, so I didn't say anything. We sat down at the table as Sherry filled our plates with food. If it tasted as good as it looked, I was in for a treat. Most of the dinner time discussion revolved around how my grandparents were doing, plans for the summer, and Sherry trying to apologize for Charles' random drunken and slightly inappropriate comments. Although to me, Charles was funny. The things he said were no more disturbing than what James and I had talked about on a regular basis, but of course our parents didn't know about that. We all laughed and talked pretty much the whole time, but as I washed down my food with some water, I heard a loud noise that sounded like it came from the upstairs. It was a thump, like something had fallen over. We all heard it, and his parents brushed it off. This house makes noises like that all the time, Charles said, just before wiping his mouth with a napkin. When dinner was over, I thanked them both for the food, and James and I rushed back up the stairs to dive into some more video games. Just as I got to the top of the staircase, I remembered the dark room and I took another peek in. I stood there in dismay and confusion as I peered into the room. Something was not the same. The rectangular large piece of wood that had just been on the wall before dinner was now gone. "Hey James," I called ahead to him. "Come here a sec. Wasn't there a piece of wood on the wall in this room? Now it's just a hole." James came over to where I was standing, walked into the room and flipped on the light switch. "Come over here and look," he said, motioning me to join him. I don't know why this happens. I know I nailed the board on there, but it always does this. Falls back down. He pointed to the floor where the piece of wood was now laying. "This is what the noise during dinner came from." "Why is there a big hole here in the wall?" I asked. He gave me a serious look. "Well, we don't hardly ever come in here, so I didn't think to tell you before, but there's another room on the other side of this hole." "Another room?" I asked, confused. "Hold on a second, let me get a flashlight. I'll show you," he said. I could hear him running into his bedroom to get the light, as I kept looking into the dark hole in the wall, trying to get a glimpse of something, anything. He came back into the room and bent down next to me. He handed me the flashlight. "Here, take a look," he said. I gripped the flashlight in my hand, feeling the cold, cylindrical metal body of the maglite in my sweaty palm. I was excited yet nervous as I pointed it toward the darkness within the hole and clicked the button down to engage the beam of light. "Wow, it's huge," I said. It was a big, unfinished room. I couldn't see much in it except some pieces of wood laying on the floor and the ceiling, which was slanted on both sides and came to a point. "Why wasn't it finished? Why isn't there an actual door?" I asked. "Someone told my mom and dad that the man who built the house was never able to finish this room," he said. "He died in it." I stared at him for a second, waiting for him to tell me he was just pulling my leg. But he was either a master of poker faces or he was telling the truth. "How did he die?" I asked. "I heard that he had a massive heart attack in this room and he died instantly. But that's just what my parents heard," he said. I didn't put much thought into the boards coming loose from the wall, and neither did he. I guess we both just assumed that there was a logical explanation behind it. We were both fascinated with anything concerning the paranormal, and a real-life first-hand experience with it would be welcomed, granted that it didn't involve any personal or physical harm to either of us. Our skepticism of the supernatural ran deep, but our questioning minds wanted to be challenged and pushed. Even at our age, we knew more than a handful of people who seemed to believe with every bone in their body that they had indeed been confronted with the paranormal. Any logical or rational explanations had been discarded by them. My skeptic tendencies made it hard for me to put much faith into these claims, however, and until I could fully vouch for an occurrence like that, I would always doubt their validity. I asked James if there had been anything strange happening in the house, to which he replied in a way that wasn't a definitive yes or no. He did say that there had always seemed to be unexplained noises coming from the unfinished room, at random times, but in a routinely manner. Noises that sounded like someone walking around upstairs. Nothing that would ever be considered menacing or threatening, though, and perhaps could even have a logical explanation upon any level of simple investigating. I nevertheless thought it was remarkably interesting, and I felt compelled to sit and discuss it further. But I knew that this was where James had lived all of his life, and that he was used to these things, so I decided to switch gears and cool down on the enthusiastic probing. It was still early in the night and we had more games to play, so we put the boards back, making sure that they were secure enough not to fall before heading back into his room. Dim light slowly leaks into the small spaces between my eyelids as the room around me comes into view. I'm awakened by a sound. What sort of sound? Where was the sound coming from? I didn't know yet. I think to myself that I must have fallen asleep on the floor at some point. As I raise myself up and glance down at my watch, it's too dark to read the dial. My head is pounding and my mouth is dry, which is probably a result from the awkward sleeping position and possible snoring that I was often guilty of. The TV, which is the only light source in the room, is filled with fuzz yet completely silent. Everything is quiet. Not even the faint sounds of the old house settling or even the wind outside is audible. The door that leads to the upstairs porch is open, but I can hear no crickets, frogs, or anything. I wondered why no one woke me up so that I could at least get in bed. But James wasn't in his bed either. I was debating on heading downstairs when I heard another noise that stopped me in my tracks. It was James. He was calling my name. "Yeah? Where are you?" I asked. He didn't respond. It was hard for me to tell where it came from, but it sounded close. It couldn't have possibly been coming from all the way downstairs, but more nearby. Perhaps the upstairs hallway or room with the boards. I turn on the light in the bedroom, and it casts plenty of light on the upstairs hallway, and I don't see James. I make my way further down the hall, getting closer to the entrance of the other room, and again, I hear, "Daniel, Daniel, Daniel, where are you?" I speak louder, demanding an answer. Entering the dark room, I pull the light switch, and a sudden wave of chills creeps down my spine. I can feel every individual hair on my arms stand up. The boards on the wall that we had secured were gone. The hole into the unfinished room appeared much larger to me. No longer was its accessibility limited to smaller-sized individuals. It didn't make sense to me, but it had noticeably expanded. As I walked closer to the hole in the wall, the most disturbing thing became clear. The boards were not lying just below the hole on the floor, as if they had simply fallen. They were all scattered on the other side of the room, making it look as though they had been knocked loose from the other side, from inside the hidden room. Were the voices coming from that room? It made no sense, and even though my eagerness to go any closer to investigate was at an all-time low, I wanted to confront my fear. I hesitantly looked into the darkness of the hole. "Hello? James, are you in there?" I said in a raspy, whispered tone. I didn't want to hear an answer from here. I wanted to go downstairs and see James getting a snack from the kitchen, laughing at me for getting all spooked by his joke. I would then join in on the laughing, use a few profanities towards him, and all would be well. My eyes opened up like golf balls and my heart sank as blood violently rushed through my veins. Something answered me. "Daniel, Daniel, what are you doing in there?" A bright light is shining in my eyes and I immediately know the voice. It's Sherry. "Are you okay?" she asked. I'm gasping for air, my heart pounding as though I've just ran a marathon, and I'm entirely drenched in sweat. I look around, still trying to understand what's going on. Had I been dreaming? Had I got up in my sleep to come to this room? She's waiting for my response. I'm okay, but I don't know what's going on," I said. "I don't remember falling asleep or coming in here. It's 2 a.m, honey, and Chester and I both woke up from you yelling, in your sleep, I guess. I had no idea where it was coming from. Is James in here with you? Was James in here with me?" I had no idea. I remembered nothing about coming in here. My mind was blank. "I can't see anything," I said. "Be careful coming out of there. There's pieces of wood stacked up next to you," she warned, shining the light on the pile of 2x4 planks at my feet, directing my eyes with it. It took me a minute to gather myself, wiping the thick coat of dust off of my clothes that had already begun to accumulate. How long had I been asleep in here? Had my previous intrigue with this room been the driving force behind me sleepwalking into it? I must have fallen asleep on the floor and then for some reason got up and come to this room. I had a dream about it too. A crazy dream, I said. I stood up and looked around the dark room. "So James isn't in his room? Where would he be this late?" "I don't know, but I've checked every place in the house other than this room. We've never come in this room, so I didn't think he'd be in here. I'm starting to get worried. Come on out, I'm going to go downstairs and look for him outside." I can tell she's getting nervous and I can hear the sound of her shoes hitting each step on the way down. I decide to make my way out when I see another flashlight laying on the ground, just outside the opening. Even though James is missing, my mind shifts to the dream I had earlier. I could vividly remember something answering me from inside here, but I can't recall what it was. I'm almost certain, however, that it wasn't James. The voice seemed to be much deeper than his, and it was almost like a whisper. Definitely a male voice, and one that I wasn't familiar with at all. It said something that had startled me, something unsettling enough to make me scream in my sleep. But what was it? I know I can think of it if I keep trying. I can hear Sherry now, and Charles too, both their voices filled with worry and concern. They're both screaming out into the night in hopes of a response. I pick up the flashlight and turn it on, determined to thoroughly examine this room, even with my lingering fear very much present and growing. Thanks to this mysteriously chilling dream I had, I feel a sense of urgency to remember what that voice said, the possible importance of it prodding inside my mind. I have an idea, although the resulting reaction could very well send me fleeing downstairs in a panic. I was going to ask for an answer, just as I had asked in my dream. It was a crazy assumption to assume that since I heard a voice in my dream that I would hear a voice in real life, but my imagination would get the best of me and I would ask anyway. I walk around the room shining the light on everything I can. There is what appears to be a little area for a closet but with no door, a space made into the wall with plenty of room on the left or right for clothes to hang or things to be stored. Not really knowing what to ask, I settle for, "Is there anyone in here?" And wait. A few seconds go by and nothing. The only sound I can hear is Sherry and Charles downstairs, frantically scrambling around, desperate to find their son. I turn around to sweep the room with light one final time, and immediately notice something that wasn't there a few moments before. Now lying on the wood floor in front of me was a newspaper clipping. It was undeniably old and discolored, but the headline of the article was in large black print and still quite legible. "Local carpenter and daughter killed in brutal murder under investigation." A quiet community is in a state of shock this week after town authorities uncover a grisly crime scene involving the murder of a well-respected citizen and his young daughter. Police say the crime took place inside the home of William Brock, age 38. Upon further investigation, it appears to have been an entirely random break-in, as William was finishing up a room that would eventually be his own daughter's, who also perished in the violent attack. There are no suspects at this time, and any information regarding this will help aid the police in the ongoing pursuit of justice for William and his daughter Emily. The disturbing article was followed by a picture of the Victorian-style home. Newly built, its pristine beauty is pictured now forever tarnished by this cloud of darkness. A savage act of brutality had once occurred in the very room I now stood in. I folded the article with trembling, sweaty hands and put it into my pants pockets. I direct my flashlight towards the exit to make my escape, but wait. What the hell? The hole is now covered with the boards, denying me of a way out. I feel like death is imminent for me as I kick the boards and scream for James's parents. The wooden boards feel like concrete, and I begin to realize that any attempt to loosen or break them is useless. Where are James's parents? My anxiety is out of control and my fight-or-flight switch has flipped. The idea of turning around is petrifying to me, but I do anyway, while preparing to use my metal flashlight as a weapon. I spin around, my weapon raised and shining in front of me, when I'm met with a force that freezes my entire body. I instantly lose my grip on the light as the heavy body of it collides with the floor. I'm trying to move with every bit of strength in me, but I can't. I can't even move an inch. It's claustrophobic. The feeling of being awake and aware of your surroundings but completely unable to move. I'm going to die in this room, I thought, waiting for that moment of blunt force trauma to drop me to my knees. Or perhaps it would be painless. Either way, at that moment, I thought it was inevitable, but it never happened. Instead, the same voice I had heard earlier in my dream, the voice with the message I couldn't remember, spoke to me. Helpless and terrified, I had no choice but to listen in horror.
"Leave our home. Your friend's bloodline took what wasn't theirs. The evil doing of their ancestors they now benefit from. But not for long."
I am now let loose from the arms of the dead, seemingly spared, although James's parents may not be so lucky. I waste no time getting to the exit as I witness the barricaded wood now being removed. It is only now as I make my successful escape that I remember the voice from the dream, and the message it gave me.
"My little girl wanted a friend.